have a very special presentation today, and this is to demonstrate and explain the history behind this very interesting timepiece. Now, this timepiece is specifically made, or was specifically made, this was developed between 1875 and appears to have been perfected by 1887. However, this was specifically made as an artillery rangefinder. This is a télémètre, and it is called the Télémètre Montandon. Now there are, this watch did have a development process. Now this was originally fabricated by the house of Émile Montandon Saint-Croix. Now this was run by Émile Montandon, and most specifically, this was Edward Émile Montandon. Now this firm had probably been set up by the father. However, the brother of this Edward Émile was a Louis Émile, and Louis Émile was a Swiss artillery officer who eventually reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. Now in 1875, he had been tasked by a German military officer. This was Ehrenberg. Now, Ehrenberg, he asked for such a piece because the German military had been gearing up, and this was something that they were really interested in developing. And this piece was originally known as the Ehrenberg Montandon chronometer. And so this Lieutenant Colonel Ehrenberg asked Émile Montandon to develop this. It was tested originally at Karlsruhe in Germany. And at this stage, the piece was quite crude. It had not been fully developed, and it basically left this test with this Lieutenant Colonel Ehrenberg being very dissatisfied. However, Émile continued to develop this for this Lieutenant von Ehrenberg, who was a Baden artillery officer. And eventually we find that by around 1885, we are finding this piece mentioned in Swiss military reviews, in artillery reviews. As a matter of fact, by 1885, this is within a decade of its original inception, it was already known then as Télémètre Montandon, and we find in the Revue Militaire Suisse from 1885, this is discussed in detail. And this is very interesting because we read their summation. In summary of the advantages of the Télémètre Ehrenberg Montandon, it can be stated that it is superior to all known analog instruments and can serve the officer for the recording of processes in peacetime. In combat, it can be even more varied. It could serve the officers for reconnaissance, or for the officers who direct the fire of the infantry or the artillery. And so this is very astonishing that by 1885, this is already recognized, this piece is already recognized as superior to all known analog instruments. And this is very fascinating because this company was fabricating in the mountains of Saint-Croix, and indeed, they would produce this watch for foreign militaries, in particular, the German military, and the armament company Krupp purchased in one order 50 such pieces. So they were clearly using these. And we also even find in the Museum of Saint-Croix, approximately 15 to 20 years ago, there's records that there was a Chinese version of the Télémètre Montandon. And this is very fascinating. So this was clearly an item that was sold to foreign militaries. Now, this piece here, when we open it, and I will provide close-ups, we do see the stamp of Émile Montandon, which was registered in 1887. Therefore, we know that this piece must date from 1887 or after the registration date. But also, we see the German stamps for silver quality. And this is very important. And this, as a matter of fact, this particular piece was purchased at auction from Cuxhaven, which is on the Baltic Sea. And one may speculate, this provides very interesting speculations, however, because a second watch, and this was a later development of this, which we will discuss in a little bit. This is the so-called chronoscope Télémètre Montandon. Now, that piece was purchased at auction in Great Britain, and it came with a diver's or miner's hood around the watch. Now, this hood protected the watch from, this was a brass surrounding compartment with a window, a glass window to see the watch. And now this would protect the watch from dust, and it would protect the watch from water. And one may surmise that these pieces were being used on board submarines for calculating the distances, perhaps for the guns on board, perhaps for the firing torpedoes or whatnot. So this may be an indication. Now, it's interesting that we find this already in Germany. That was the question is, was this used circa World War I on board a German U-boat? It's a possibility. We cannot rule this out, but this is quite fascinating. Now, I would like to discuss a little bit. So let's talk about the development. Now, we do know this project was begun in 1875, and by 1885 we do find first mentions of this. Now, this was a device that was noticed by the foreign presses of many different European countries, and we find this appearing in Dutch periodicals and in French periodicals. We know that this is mentioned in an 1890 Dutch military publication. This is the so-called chronometer Stelsel Montandon, and this was in this period, 1890. We also find it in Austrian military publications in 1891. The Austrians, it's interesting, they must have picked up on this through the Germans. Now, the Austrians are calling this the chronometer system Montandon. Von Oberleutnant Strutek is the Oberleutnant Strutek is the military observer who was writing about this device. Now, this was also mentioned in the Italian military's Rivista di Artiglieria e Genio from 1891. So the Italians were following this item. We find this throughout the 1880s in many German publications. This is largely followed by the Germans, who are very keen on these types of military applications. But in a Spanish military publication in 1889, we also find that this device was given to the, this was called a chronotelemetre Ehrenberg Montandon, and this was mentioned in a Madrid publication from that year. And this was part of a almost raffle of equipment which was given to the General Command of Cuba for this item. So one wonders if in 1898, when the Cuban-American War was going on and Theodore Roosevelt was headed there, we wonder if the Spanish forces did not have this employed against them. This is periodic evidence, they did have these devices. So, but once again, we find this. Of course, we find this in the Swiss and French presses. There's an article from the French press in 1887, speaking of an ingénieuse invention en Suisse de canton de Vaud, Monsieur Émile Montandon, lieutenant-colonel d'artillerie, a inventé un montre dit télémètre. And so, once again, and this watch was very accurate. This watch now, this is, we have these divisions, and this was based on the speed of 334 meters per second. Now, and this watch had a accuracy of within 25 meters. So we have the gradients here, and basically this has a button with a stopwatch function, so that you could stop this hand here, and you were able to calculate in time. And the entire dial is based on 300. Now, I will provide a formula for calculating how this was used, but this is basically distance equals speed times time measured in kilometers. And this device could calculate up to a range of 10 kilometers. So this scale of 50H corresponds to 334 meters per second, the speed of sound, and yields the gradation in kilometers, hectometers, and quarter hectometers. That's thousands of meters, hundreds of meters, and 25s of meters. So, but this is very interesting, and the margin of error, once again, was approximately a maximum of 25 meters. But one will notice there is a red scale here. This is based on, this is a pulsation-based 15 scale for beats per minute. And this would be N times 4. And this is basically a doctor's watch. And in one auction, we do see this only sold as a doctor's watch. It was understood by this scale that a doctor could use as well. And this is probably why it was very handy in reconnaissance applications. So we do know that this inventor of this, now he died in 1896. Now his brother's company of Montandon and St. Croix appears to have been liquidated by 1890. So watches that would have been fabricated under this, it's not clear. Did it go to the company? Now, there was another company who basically fundamentally took over. It was sold to them. Now, Emile was a part of that company. But after he died, it's not clear. Did they continue with this? It's very possible that they continued producing this and selling to their customers. That had been established by Montandon and St. Croix. But what appears to be this is not exactly clear on the development, but the so-called chronoscope télémètre Montandon, that may have been the last iteration of this. And if so, this would have probably been post-1887, but certainly before 1896. Probably before the actual Montandon and St. Croix liquidated in around 1890. So now there is another interesting experience with this. Now, this device was used by Émile Montandon in Swiss artillery tests. And we do find him repeating in exercise in 1887 with this watch, which was a simulation of maneuvers which the Russian Tsarist military did at the fortification of Brest-Litovsk in the same year. And this was a night fire drill. And so we find articles devoted to discussing the results of that night fire drill with this watch. So this is very, very interesting. This piece was, of course, now there were watches basically with the application of testing, checking for speed earlier on. In certainly by the 1830s, we find so-called chronometers for measuring the speed of running water. Also, the American military was using another, basically this was another chronometer, telemeter, that was made by another Montandon watch fabricator, and that was Julien Montandon, who was the son of Pierre Henri, who immigrated with his family to the U.S. between 1814 and 1815. Now, they were briefly imprisoned by the English and kept in London. However, they were eventually released, and Thomas Jefferson, through friends, approached Pierre Henri, who to be a watchmaker in his local community. Now, he was already quite aged, but he passed this job offer on to his son-in-law, who was Louis Lachaud, who married the Elise Montandon, Sophie Montandon. However, the whole family were all engaged in the watchmaking, from basically the boxes to the end product, the entire watch. And now Sophie's brother, Julien, originally after they moved to the U.S., now they were in Elizabethtown. However, Julien was making watches signed in New York, and we already find him certainly by the late 1820s, moving to Washington, D.C. At that time, it was called Washington City. He would eventually become a watchmaker to three U.S. presidents. He probably knew Thomas Jefferson, so he was liaised or connected with 4 U.S. presidents. However, his watches became used. He was fabricating pieces for the Department of War, and this was the so-called Ordnance Department of the Army, which was artillery. And he also did a lot of experiments, the depths of the sea, experiments with an 8-inch mortar. These were all military applications. He also did astronomical observations at the U.S. Naval Observatory with various officers that were associated with projects in scientific and military research for the U.S. military. But so he did have a similar piece, but certainly not as well developed as this piece, because obviously we're talking about 50 years of technology. And now the movement for this piece, it's not exactly clear who the fabricator is behind this. So this is clearly a special made solution for this application. And clearly Émile was dealing with subcontractors who helped solve a problem of getting this project off the ground. Clearly he was very mechanically inclined himself. He spent over a decade refining this watch, but this is just a very interesting story of this little known object. Now, this object was documented by the Swiss Army Museums Association, and there's a very interesting article which they discuss this among other pieces. But as this is a very rare object, it is interesting to review this and to explain its significance. However, we see that if we can find these telemeters, Chinese versions, certainly made for the Germans. Obviously, the English had their hands on it, but this device was discussed in the European press, and even it found its way into the High Command of Cuba, of the Spanish military. We see this basically circulating around the world, the militaries of the world. But this was a brief discussion of this rather interesting piece, and I will definitely provide some close-ups and it does work immaculately. Probably needs some cleaning. But this was a note for the record on this artillery rangefinder. I hope you found it interesting, and thank you for your attention. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.